Well, it's the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion. If power is the ability to get somebody to do something that you want, you can do it three ways. You can threaten them, sticks, you can pay them, carrots, or you can attract them and co-opt them. And if you can co-opt people, it's a lot cheaper. You don't have to spend as much on carrots and sticks. Well, if you look at Franklin Roosevelt's Four Freedoms in the 30s and 40s, if you look at the Cold War era and think of the appeal of American popular culture behind the Iron Curtain, if you look at Tiananmen Square protests in China in 1989, where the students put up a replica of the Statue of Liberty, those are examples of where we attracted others to our ideas. Well, we're not doing very well if you believe the public opinion polls. In the last 2 or 3 years, according to the recent Pew polls, the attractiveness of the United States and Europe dropped about 30 points per country in Europe, including countries that supported us on the Iraq War. And if you look at the Islamic world, it's even worse. In Indonesia in 2000, we were attractive to about 75% of the people. Now it's gone down to 15%. And yet these are the people we need to help us in the war on terrorism. Absolutely. The fact that we're open and that we represent all parts of the world makes us attractive to others. And I think it's something that we would hurt ourselves if we were to suddenly turn inward and close ourselves off. I think so. If you look at the Silicon Valley success, temporarily in suspense, but about to recover, I believe, you'll notice that a large number of the successful entrepreneurs there come from Asia, from India and China. Many of them stay and become very productive American citizens, but they keep their contacts with their families and friends back home, which gives those people a very different picture of the United States than they may get in their local newspapers. One of the things that's quite striking is how little success we've had as a communicator. Here we are, the world's greatest communications country, and we're often out-communicated by people hiding in caves. The United States, if you believe the public opinion polls again, is less attractive than bin Laden in countries like Morocco and Jordan. And Pakistan. Those are countries that we need. We've not been very good at getting our points across. One thing that's interesting is we don't do a very good job investing in soft power. A recent bipartisan commission reported that we spent about $150 million a year on public diplomacy toward the Muslim world. That's a pittance. That's about, I'd say, 2 hours of the defense budget. And we spend about 400 times more on our hard power, our military power, than we do on our soft power. Something wrong with that ratio. Well, it is, but it's odd that we have to hire Bell Pottinger, a British firm, this far into the occupation of Iraq to get our message across. It's really not been a great success story that we have not had a more effective television and radio performance in Iraq. And yet it's important that we attract the Iraqi moderates. That's where our soft power comes in. You can't use soft power to attract the hardliners. You'd never attract Saddam Hussein or bin Laden. But you've got to attract the moderate majority. And it's good that we're hiring somebody to do it, but it's also too bad that we didn't do this a long time ago. Both, in the sense that if the United States becomes the kiss of death in domestic politics in a country, a leader is not very likely to be able to cooperate with the United States. Take Pakistan, for example. President Musharraf has to do a balancing act between his own fundamentalist opposition and the questions and demands that we put upon him for cooperation. And the more unpopular the United States is with the public, the more difficult it is for Musharraf to make concessions to us. So you can't really separate the two very well. I suppose in a very authoritarian situation, let's say Uzbekistan, maybe the public doesn't matter much. But any case where public opinion does have an effect, then we have to think about both the public and the leaders. That's one way of involving it, by essentially promoting Pakistan to the equivalent of a NATO ally for defense procurement purposes, we flatter them. Also provide them hardware, which is more on the hard power side. But it would also be important if we were to reduce the tariffs against Pakistani textiles, which would affect a lot more Pakistanis. And so we're inconsistent in the way we deal with this. If we wanted to have a more effective policy in Pakistan, we ought to do more about economic aid, education, and, as I said, protectionism here at home, as well as the provision of defense equipment. Well, there's a problem of coordination among departments. There's also a problem of domestic politics. People who are protectionists in the Congress don't want to see concessions made to Pakistan, even though it might help us in the battle against terrorism. Well, Indonesia is the largest Islamic country in the world, and as I mentioned earlier, polls showed that as recently as 4 years ago, they had a quite favorable view of the United States. But the view of the United States has declined quite precipitously, in part because of our policies, which appear to be anti-Islamic in their eyes. For example, the fact that they see us as unbalanced in our policy on the Middle East peace process, or the invasion of Iraq. Both of these were seen as a willingness to take Muslim lives without care or concern. I think what we need to do in our soft power is to, A, show that we are even-handed, or at least willing to push forward on the peace process, and B is to make a success out of the reconstruction of Iraq. But I think a third point would be the importance of showing that we have done a good deal, for example, protecting Muslims in Bosnia or in Kosovo. So there are things that we could be doing to get our message across in the world's largest Islamic country, which we have not done very well. There are a variety of ways of communicating. One is broadcasting, and one of the things we should be doing is putting more resources into the Voice of America and its equivalents. A second is through contacts with people, which means having more opportunities for exchange programs where Indonesian leaders come here, American speakers go there. Another is students. One of the great sources of soft power, indeed, of ideas about the United States is the 500,000 students who study in the United States every year and then go back to their countries. So some of the application of soft power is broadcasting short-term messages, but some of it is laying the grounds for long-term relationships. One of the problems is that in our effort to control visas, we have cut down on the import of foreign students. And in some ways, you can understand that the bureaucracy would say, gee, I never want to be blamed for letting somebody in again. On the other hand, we've seen a tremendous drop in the number of foreign students that is a result of the visa policy. There's got to be a way to balance those two objectives better than we've done. Well, soft power and hard power can complement each other. It's not necessarily one or the others. When we act arrogantly and fail to communicate our values well, it makes it harder for us to use our hard power. For example, a year ago when we wanted to send the 4th Infantry Division across Turkey to enter Iraq from the north, the Turkish parliament rejected it because they regarded our policy as illegitimate and unpopular. So there's a case where essentially our failure to develop soft power or attractiveness in Turkey interfered with our hard power. I would not argue that you should use only soft power. I think, though, it's equally important to realize that you shouldn't only use hard power. I argue in my book that it's the ability to combine the two, hard and soft power, that would make us a smart power. This new TV network, satellite TV in Arabic, Al-Hurra, is a useful step, but it's one step out of many that need to be taken. Well, we've already started a Radio Sawa, which is an Arabic language radio broadcasting. But I would say that we're going to have to do more. We're going to have to do things in terms of more exchange programs with Arab countries. We're going to have to, I think, have a change in some of our policy issues in which we show that we're more concerned about democracy and about the growth, economic growth in Arab countries. It's a whole range of things that I think have to be done. Well, I think the book is relevant in the following sense, that you need to have soft power to succeed in the war on terrorism the same way you needed it in the Cold War. If you look back on the Cold War, we won the Cold War by a doctrine of containment, which was partly military, but partly soft power. We not only held the Soviets from aggression, but we ate away their confidence from inside, behind the Iron Curtain, through the transfer of ideas which came from broadcasting, exchange programs, and so forth. The analogy to the war on terrorism would be you're not going to attract bin Laden. You're going to need bombs and bullets to deal with him. But you can attract the moderates, and the moderate majority are the people that he tries to recruit from. So if you're going to win a battle in the war on terrorism, you need hard power for the extremists, but you need soft power to keep the extremists from recruiting among the moderates. Some people see the war on terrorism, or the Islamic variant of terrorism, as a clash of civilizations, Islam versus the West. I think it's more fruitful to see it as a civil war within Islamic civilization, in the sense that a group of extremists is trying to force others to return to what they see as a more pure form of their religion. But that moderate majority is also interested in things like jobs, health, education for their children, and dignity. And we can appeal to them if we focus on those issues. Well, that certainly has been the major issue of the 9/11 Commission and Richard Clarke's testimony, which is that by focusing on Iraq, they basically diverted resources away from the battle against al-Qaeda. And then they tried to make the two part of the same war on terrorism. If you do a balance sheet on the war of Iraq, what we gained was the removal of a tyrant. That's a good thing. But we also lost in the terms of the opinion of the United States because of the way we did it, and also according to intelligence reports that we've seen and the International Institute of Strategic Studies, the war in Iraq greatly helped al-Qaeda with its recruiting throughout the Islamic world. So some gains on the positive side of the ledger, some losses. Well, I believed in a year ago that there would be chemical weapons there. I didn't believe the nuclear, and I think that part was exaggerated at the time. I don't think that we needed to go in to a war right then just for the chemical weapons. I think it would have made sense to use force before Saddam developed nuclear weapons, but I didn't believe that he was about to develop nuclear weapons then, and I don't think he's about to develop them right now. Dick Clarke teaches as an adjunct, which means somebody who comes in one day a week, on the issue of terrorism and how to respond to terrorism. And he certainly is well equipped to teach about that, since he has served in 4 administrations, both Republican and Democratic, and has been the top anti-terrorism coordinator within the George W. Bush White House. So it seems to me he's well equipped to teach in a school of government or public policy about that set of issues. And that set of issues is one where we've been doing work for quite some time. We wrote reports about the threat of terrorism with weapons of mass destruction well before 9/11. The course is open to any students. We have Republicans on our faculty, we have Democrats on our faculty. I think Dick Clarke originally was a Republican, though obviously he's lately been criticizing the administration. I try to be fair and balanced in the book. In fact, I praise the Bush administration for its major initiative on economic aid, the Millennium Challenge account, and also for its major initiative on HIV/AIDS and combating it. And when they do good things, I think they deserve praise. On the support for the United States in the Baltics, I think that really, they've done well on that, but I think the credit for that really goes back to our winning the Cold War and to the steps that were taken in prior administrations toward admitting those countries to NATO. I think a lot of people in the Defense Department, in the military, understand the role of soft power. One thing that's interesting is, just to go back to our previous caller who was from Special Forces, suppose there's an enemy outpost and you want to overcome it. One possibility is to bomb it. Second possibility would be to bribe the people to leave it. Those would be both forms of hard power, coercion or payment. Third possibility is to convince those people they should leave through psychological operations. So soft power is one of three different ways of exercising power. In the Defense Department, when I was there, one of the things I thought was a great source of American soft power was the military-to-military exchanges. The United States had a number of exchanges with military officers in other countries, and we not only told them things about how do you be more effective in use of certain armaments, we also talked to them about human rights and the importance of foreign militaries observing human rights. So the Defense Department is not immune to understanding soft power, even if sometimes some of the civilian leaders in the Defense Department may not be quite as good as the military on this. Well, there's always some concern about stealing technology, but these military exchanges are pretty carefully done. People go home with ideas in their heads. They may take home ideas which they can put to practical use. They may also go home with ideas about the United States being a pretty interesting place. In the second chapter of my book, I give some examples from the Cold War, where we brought Russians, or Soviets as they then were, here. And there was a great concern in Washington, should we really bring these Soviet visitors here because they're going to go back with their heads full of our technology? Well, some of them did. They also went back with their heads full of our ideas. And some of those people who were involved in the early exchanges actually became major players in the movement of perestroika and glasnost in the 1980s that began the end of the Soviet Union. Well, the radio Sawa and the Al-Hura TV come under the Broadcasting Board of Governors, which is a bipartisan commission established by the Congress to oversee the various American broadcasting that is done, which goes from Voice of America to Radio Free Europe to Radio Liberty and so forth. The great danger is not that they will be too far from the American government's line, but that they will be seen as being too close to the American government's line. It's very important for us to allow a degree of leeway in criticism because it increases our credibility. If the people in the receiving countries think that this is just American propaganda, it's less credible. If they hear criticism on that, if they hear different points of view, they say, you know, the Americans are a free country after all. There's a wonderful anecdote from the Cold War where the Czechoslovak government imported American films only when the films were critical about the United States. And the net effect of that on the Czechoslovak public was to say, well, this film may be critical of the U.S., but if the U.S. will produce a film that's critical of itself, it must be a free country. I was supportive initially. I thought this would be a good idea to have somebody who'd been a top Madison Avenue executive try to run the public diplomacy part of the State Department. I'm told that it failed for a variety of reasons. One was it was never given a top priority. Second, that if you look at the programs there was a lot done on a TV program to show that Muslims lived well in the United States. In the Arab world, this was seen as a subsidiary to the fact that, in their view, we didn't care about Muslims overseas. In other words, that they looked at our policies and said we didn't care about Muslims, and here we had a slick advertisement saying we did. Advertising can't overcome a bad product. Well, I agree with your basic point that broadcasting is not going to bring democracy to the Middle East. Indeed, that's one of the reasons why we haven't done as well as we should. If you look at the United Nations Development Program's Arab Human Development Report, which was issued in 2002 and written entirely by Arabs, it showed that the Middle East is a region which has been slow in its economic growth, closed to international trade, backward in its education of women, and way behind in terms of scientific production, new articles and so forth. If we're really going to make democracy work in the Middle East, we have to develop the conditions which underpin democracy. Going into Iraq with military force does not create democracy. It's those other things that I mentioned. Maybe getting rid of Saddam Hussein is a first step, but it's far from sufficient, as we're seeing today. So I think your point is correct that we have to look at the basic conditions, and indeed the fourth chapter of my book does have a section which argues that the ability to use soft power in the Middle East has to go far beyond broadcasting and address the deeper problems of the region. Well, one of the problems is that the United States in the past has not done a very good job of developing or helping develop civil society, so that the liberals or moderates are often silenced, tossed into jail, and that means that only the Islamic extremists are the effective opposition. It just happened in Saudi Arabia last week, where a group of liberal Saudis asked for more political freedom and were locked up. We have to be continually trying to press toward reforms, toward more openness. It's not going to be done overnight with military invasions. It's going to be done with a consistent program along the lines I just mentioned. Well, universities are always hotbeds of all types of ideas. After all, that's what they're about, the production of ideas and their transmission. So radicalism is often frequently found in university settings, and sometimes it's radicalism of the left, and sometimes it's radicalism of the right. I mean, if you look at the Mohammed Atta and his colleagues, you'll find that they were not poor people from poor countries. They were relatively well-off people from relatively well-off countries. And in that sense, one has to realize that battles of ideas, to make sure that we win in that battle of ideas, is absolutely essential. And we're not doing as well on that battle of ideas as we should be. Hearts and minds matter. Well, Iran is a fascinating case. It's sort of locked between a theocracy, in which a group of mullahs who came to power after the revolution in the 70s have ultimate political control, and a democracy in which there are elections for president and for parliament. But you notice in the last round of elections, the theocrats, the ruling mullahs, prevented several thousand of the reformist candidates from running. So you had a boycott which reduced the electoral turnout. So Iran is not a democracy, but it is certainly more in the direction, if you think of this as a continuum, than many other countries in the region. I think the United States wants to continue to encourage those democratic tendencies. It's very interesting if you look at Iranians and how they react to the United States. For the ruling mullahs, the United States is the great Satan. Hollywood movies are evil. But if you look at Iranian teenagers, there's nothing more that they want than to have American videos which they can see in the privacy of their home. But if, on the other hand, we continue to try to appeal to the development of a civil society, I think eventually the mullah's dead hand of the past will be undercut. Iran might evolve into a democracy. I don't know the Havel. I know Havel, obviously. I haven't read that particular book, but I think the role of women is tremendously important. I've always been struck, to go back to the example from Iran that we just were talking about, reading Asar Nafisi's book, which is called Reading Lolita in Tehran, which is a description of how a group of women came together in the privacy of her home to discuss ideas. So when they were out on the street, they were indeed veiled and carefully in their behavior so they didn't get arrested. But when they went back to her home, they were able to explore ideas completely freely. This is an important example of the fact that educating women is going to be one of the critical dimensions of, if you want, exporting soft power in the region. Well, I think in Africa there are so many difficulties that one of the things we need to do is to show that we are in line with the aspirations of the African people. And there, I think, to be fair-minded, the Bush administration has done a number of useful things. The Millennium Challenge account that I mentioned earlier is promising aid to African countries, increases in aid to African countries that will improve their governance processes. And also, and probably most important, the administration has promised large new funds to combat HIV/AIDS, which is a huge threat. These are ways to not only deal with real problems, but also to advance America's soft power in Africa. Well, it's a very good analogy. In fact, I draw this, it's a comparison in the book. If you're trying to deal with teenagers in your family, it's a little bit late to try to spank them, particularly if they're large and male. You can try to bribe them by threatening to take away the car keys or give them a new car or something like that. But the best way to deal with them is to make sure that they've imbibed your values, that they've brought their values into their life. So if you're thinking, how do I want to deal with my teenagers? By threat, by payment, or by attraction? If you got them attracted to your values as you were bringing them up, that's probably going to be the best way to do it. Well, that's true. If you look at what the United States did after the end of the Cold War, we cut back dramatically on our expenditures on public diplomacy. We had, when the United States Information Agency was merged into the State Department at the end of the 90s, it had half as many personnel as it did in the 60s during the Cold War. In 90s, the United States at the end of the Cold War wanted a peace dividend. It didn't realize that in an information age, soft power is going to be more important than ever. So we've seen tremendous drops, a third cut in exchange programs and so forth. This amount of money that we're spending on broadcasting in many cases is paltry. We're spending about 2 hours a day in broadcasting in some languages that are important in Islamic countries. We could spend, if we spent 1% of the defense budget on public diplomacy, it would mean quadrupling what we spend on public diplomacy. The idea that we'd spend 1% of our money launching ideas as well as bombs strikes me as common sense. Well, if you believe that you win only with sticks, that's a sensible philosophy. I think, in fact, you do a lot better if you learn how to combine hard and soft power. But I am puzzled about your example of Israel and Pakistan as nuclear powers. Both of those, the United States tried to prevent Israel going nuclear and tried to prevent Pakistan going nuclear. And I was wondering if you were suggesting we should use force against them because we failed. Well, on the question of mercenaries, others call them contractors. There are indeed many military tasks that are being outsourced. And one of the interesting questions is politically, when contractors are killed, whether they're American or foreign, they receive less attention than when American soldiers are killed. On the questions of how we appeal to people in Iraq, I think that we have to keep getting across that we're there as their friends, trying to develop them, not as an imperial occupier. But that's extremely difficult when we're in a situation in which the security is as bad as it is. Our troops have to try to keep order. In keeping order, they wind up killing people, sometimes by mistake, as in the case of the journalists who were killed. And obviously that tends to hurt us. On the question of Ahmed Chalabi, since he, in fact, misled the United States in the information he provided before the war, and he is quoted in a London newspaper as saying that was the American problem, not his, I think it's not very wise for us to continue providing resources to him. Well, I think in Spain, the bombing that happened just before the elections apparently had a considerable effect. The polls showed that it was likely that the Aznar government would be reelected until the bombings, and then that changed things quite dramatically. One of the questions is how much of it was a reaction against Aznar's support of the U.S. in Iraq, which was unpopular with the large majority of the Spanish people, and how much it was the Aznar government's trying to blame it on Basque separatists when it wasn't Basque separatists, and the fact that this led to a distrust of the government, which would reinforce the pre-existing feelings of antagonism about their supporting the U.S. in Iraq. The I think the United States needs to try to appeal to the Spanish people as well as to the government of Rodriguez Zapatero to see that the reconstruction of Iraq is an important common objective, and the defeat of terrorism is an important common objective. In other words, that we may have disagreed in the past about how we went about the war, but at this point to leave Iraq as a failed state and a haven for terrorism would be bad for both of us. So if we phrased our objectives in larger sense of what was in our common interest, and were seen to be consulting more with not only the Spanish but with other Europeans, we might be able to develop more sympathy for our objectives. I have looked at Mein Kampf. I found it kind of disgusting and not a very good read, but I think the point that you're making is correct, which is we sometimes think that soft power is only ours. In fact, many others have soft power. The Nazis indeed did, with their propaganda and their various films and so forth, pioneer the use of soft power in the 1930s. Similarly, the communists did the same thing, and it's worth remembering that after 1945, communism had a good deal of soft power or attractiveness in Europe. What happened, however, was the Soviet Union squandered that soft power when it invaded Hungary and Czechoslovakia. In fact, it's ironic that the attractiveness of communism in the Soviet Union declined at the same time that Soviet hard power increased in the 60s and 70s. And I think one helped to cause the other. The way they used their hard power undercut their soft power. And as I mentioned earlier, bin Laden has soft power, attractiveness for many people in the Islamic world today. So if we ignore soft power, we're ignoring the fact that this is part of the larger struggle that we face. We've got to do a better job of getting our own values and messages across. Well, North Korea is not going to be very amenable to soft power. Kim Jong-il, the dictator there, is not going to be willing to be attracted to the United States and give up his nuclear programs. I think in North Korea we've got to marshal a coalition of countries, particularly focused around China and South Korea and Japan, to present North Korea with a choice. You either give up your nuclear weapons if you want access to resources that may help save your economy, or if you go off on your own, your economy is going to collapse. Well, I think you have to do both simultaneously. As a former Assistant Secretary of Defense, I'm the last one to deny the importance of hard power. But you have to think about what your target is. If your target is Al-Qaeda, soft power is not going to do much good. If your target is the moderates who Al-Qaeda is trying to recruit, then soft power is absolutely crucial. But your example of Japan in the 1930s is an interesting one. The Japanese tried to use soft power. They didn't do very well when they created the Greater East Asia Prosperity Sphere. People didn't believe it because they saw the Japanese raping and killing and slaughtering Chinese. It didn't make them very credible. On the other hand, it's interesting if you look at Japan today, and there's a section or chapter in my book called The Soft Power of Others, the Japanese have a fair amount of soft power. Now, what the Japanese need today, perhaps a little bit more hard power to go with it, but it's not either or. You've got to have both. Well, I'm struck at the soft power of a little bitty country like Norway, which doesn't have the English language to help and so forth, but has aligned itself with the aspirations of developing countries through its generous aid programs, and also with has done a major job in peace movements in Sri Lanka, Middle East, and so forth. And in the way the British put it, Norway is able to punch above its weight because of this. It's not that they suddenly become a superpower, but you can magnify your power if you're smart the way you use your soft power. Well, I think what you just mentioned is important. Congress is responsive to what voters say. After all, congressmen are running every 2 years. Some people say they're constantly running. So I think it does make a difference if people say, hey, we're missing something. Let's do a little bit more of this. But in addition, a lot of our soft power in the United States is generated by our civil society. So many of the beneficial nonprofit groups that work overseas in trying to provide humanitarian relief are also ways of promoting soft power, and frankly, contributing to such organizations is another thing citizens can do. Thank you.